Hey, everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we discuss the merits or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
Hello, Zach.
Dude, I was missing the Irish accent that you tried in last week's show.
It was good.
Or it was last week, wasn't it? Yeah, it was last week.
And it was a good accent.
I know. I'm still thinking about it
because
it was just so good.
You have the Queen's English. You have the perfect British accent.
Oh, you mean British accent?
Yes, and I have the good old Irish accent.
You know, there's nothing funnier than hearing my 6-year-old son do my version of a British accent. I can only imagine your daughter, before long is going to catch on to your Irish accent and just rock it, right?
Eventually, they're just going to inherit the show, and we can just sit back and.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it is cool that we sat down with that Wills and Trusts lawyer and just made sure we had this show going in perpetuity. So they'll thank us someday. I'm sure.
They will. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you, man, I don't know exactly what you're going to talk about, but you gave me the title, and I am incredibly excited.
This stuff is super cool. I will say it just is cool. It's interesting. It's fascinating. I could talk for, I guess now years at this point, about ghosts.
I thought you were going to say I could talk for 45 minutes.
We'll test that theory later. But no, I could talk honestly about this stuff all day, every day. And I can hear stories about this stuff. And it never, ever, ever gets old. And it also just makes you wonder, what is even going on? Because that's what's so frustrating about, and let's face it, you usually come down with alien stuff that's more inherently interesting to you. I usually like the paranormal ghost stuff. For me, that's inherently interesting. It's it's still at the end of the day, something's going on. How do you prove it or disprove it or what? Make sense of it. What do you even do?
Yeah. It appears that something else is happening in parallel, in tandem, and we just, for millennia, we've been experiencing it. Yeah. And for millennia, we can't put our finger on it.
Right.
And it's well, I don't know.
And the thing is, too, on top of everything we just said is, this is an episode where I do have a lot of stories, and you're kind of faced with the point of of reaching the point where you say, well, look, either people are lying.
Yep.
Or hallucinating, I guess, maybe, or something else is going on.
Yeah.
Because there's just no other explanation.
And the hallucination thing, without hearing much more, it would have to be people all hallucinating independently and hallucinating essentially the same basic thing.
Right.
Which is wait, what?
No, I know.
Because that opens up another can of worms.
That's exactly right. So that's why, to me, it's we can talk about all this stuff and have all these interesting stories. And it's well, at the end of the day, something's going on. Mm-hmm. Because I almost feel like at this point, based on everything that we've heard, and all the evidence suggests you couldn't possibly have this many coincidences. So,
or you could,
or I guess maybe you could. I guess there's no rule against that, shall we say? But
okay, so tell me, high level, what is this?
Yeah, we'll get into all the definitional stuff later. But I will say, at the turn of the year, this last year, around the holidays and kind of getting into the new year, I did a run of shows relating to Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death. And a lot of it is basically, okay, well, look, either they're ghost stories, either they're proof of an afterlife, or something else that we can't explain. Mm-hmm. This doesn't borrow from any of the work that she did, Leslie Kean specifically. But it's a phenomenon that I think it has gotten attention. People have tried to study it. And interestingly enough, when I was actually checking Dr. Jim Tucker's page at the UV Med School, they're looking for people that have experienced this because they want to study it. Oh. Because it appears to be a real thing is where I'm going, right? And so that's why it's this is super, super cool. And if you haven't signed up, check out the Patreon page. A bunch of those shows are actually on the Patreon feed. The end-of-life experiences, near-death experiences, all of those things. And they're all kind of variations on a theme. And this falls into that. And this is about crisis apparitions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you the definition of what that is after I give you an anecdotal story, just to kind of to whet your beak, if you will. So let's jump right into this first story here, and I'll say all you need to know takes place in the 1960s out in New York. You have a woman by the name of Simma Lieberman in her early 20s. She's visiting her mother, who lives in the Bronx, and she's at home with her, hanging out. Simma's boyfriend, a man named Johnny, and I'll say both of them in their early 20s, right? So they're happily dating at this point in time. And Simma described her boyfriend Johnny as a mellow hippie who, quote, loved everybody. And she said he was a guy so nice that friends actually called him a pushover. And so while Simma was out visiting her mother at her mother's house, Johnny was out with his buddies having a good time on the town, I suspect. And while she was sitting with her mother in the evening, phone rang. Simma answered the phone. Johnny was on the line. Mm-hmm. And she said he sounded rushed and, interestingly, like far away. And the line crackled a bit, and she could hear static. And all he said to her was, "I just want you to know that I love you, and I'll never be mean to anybody again."
Oh.
Then she said there was more static, and then the line went dead. And Lieberman was just left with a dial tone. And so it's 1960s, right? So just keep that in mind. So, you'd probably try to figure out the reverse number, tried calling him back. Nothing. Nobody picked up. She just started to get this like unsettled feeling.
Yeah, that's a weird message to get regardless of the circumstances.
So the next morning, when she got up, she received a call from Johnny's mother that he had been murdered the night before. He had been sadly shot in the head as he sat in his car, waiting for his buddies. There was a sizable gap in time between the time of his death and the time of his phone call. So after figuring out the time of death, because, of course, being shot in the head, it was an instant death in the car where he was murdered.
Yeah.
Given the fact there weren't cell phones at the time, he couldn't have quickly called. He couldn't have left his car to run to a payphone and call her.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's likely, the estimates, 8 to 9 hour gap in terms of the time that he had passed and the time she received the phone call.
So you're saying that based on the crime scene, he died at, say, 7 p.m. and she got the phone call at like 2 a.m.?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's weird.
So
that's super weird.
Is how I would start by teeing up what crisis apparitions are. Okay. Now, this isn't a literal apparition, right? Because she didn't claim to see anything.
Sure.
But she got a call.
Yeah.
On a landline telephone to her after he died.
Yeah. And she, I assume, would know very much what he sounded like and be able to identify him. And she had no second guesses at the time or later that it might have been someone else playing a trick.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, actually.
But, yeah.
I mean, okay.
But that would be a really dark, weird sort of thing to do.
Yeah, and also that would suggest that the person knew that he died. So maybe it was like, I guess maybe the murderer or something, but then it sounded like Johnny. So it almost seems like it's still, I think where this comes down is there's no obvious explanation. So I'll now give you the definition of a crisis apparition, okay? Now that you kind of know or got your head in the right space here. But yeah, a crisis apparition is a vision oftentimes of a person undergoing an extreme emotional trauma at the time of this apparition appearing or something happening like this. These crises include, but aren't limited to, disease, severe injury, or death. These apparitions appear to loved ones during or shortly after the crisis. And so it's basically like somebody's going through extreme trauma.
Yeah.
And for a certain window or an amount of time kind of during that, before, or probably after, I should say, then there's an apparition or experience where somebody is contacted by the dead.
That is so odd. That's so odd.
It is just odd.
That is so odd.
I know, man.
Okay.
I know. So I thought...
does this always include the deceased? Or are there would a scenario where someone is incapacitated or unable, like physically unable to communicate, actually does communicate? Would that fall into does that make sense?
Well, no, this is super interesting.
Like someone's pinned under a car or something like that, or
that's actually okay. This is really cool that you asked this question, because especially with paranormal type topics, it's hard to put brackets around like what qualifies as what type of a phenomenon, right? Like, and so initially when I started looking into this, I was thinking crisis apparitions were truly just somebody's going through trauma and then they're like, hey, help me out, and then somebody like feels bad and then calls them up like, oh, don't take the flight or something, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't find any examples of that.
Okay.
So like all the examples that I have today and the ones that I saw online were strictly basically at the time of death.
Okay.
But I had thought of that before, which was basically like, hey, aren't there examples of people like that just had a car accident and like somebody calls to check in, they're like, help me, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't stumble across any of those today though.
Fair
but
enough.
Very interesting question. So, okay, that was a bizarre one. Let's get into one that would probably fall into a little bit more typical example of a crisis apparition.
Okay.
And again, this one's just like, okay, I'll go along for the ride. You don't need to know the ton of details about the setup here. 2 people involved in this story. One is named Nina. She's a salon worker and a stylist in New Jersey. And then a man named Michael, who was one of her clients that started off, you know, they kind of got to know each other and actually became like really, really good friends through him coming to visit her, and she would style his hair and all that stuff. So even though I know it sounds like a client and, professional relationship, it's like they became very, very close.
Yeah. And
he often said that she was almost like a therapist to him, because he was like, you know, while he's getting his haircut, like talking to her about his problems, she's giving advice, all that kind of stuff. So
pretty
very,
common,
very, very
actually.
close. Yeah, for sure. So this took place back in 2001. Again, we're out in New Jersey. Saturday evening, totally unassuming evening, and Nina was wrapping up her shift at the salon, right? So she's finishing up work. And here's a knock at the door. Went to go open it, and she saw Michael standing there. He was smiling. Michael said, Nina, I can't stay long. I just wanted to stop by and say thank you for everything. And she said that they actually chatted a bit more before Michael left, and then Nina went home. Mm-hmm. Didn't think hardly anything else about it, right? It just typical conversation, like, okay.
Well, that's maybe really nice. Okay,
exactly. Cool. The next day, Sunday, she received a strange call from one of the salon employees letting her know that Michael's body had been found the previous morning, at least 9 hours before she talked to him at the shop, and he had died by suicide.
What?
He was actually found around 11 a.m. on Saturday morning, and the time that Nina was wrapping up her shift was around 7-ish at night. So, I mean, just a huge discrepancy in terms of the events of the day, right?
Oh, my God.
And, like, she says it was him. Like, it wasn't a ghost.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, I mean, I guess
he knocked on the door. I talked to him. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh wow! Like what does the police chief or the coroner do with that information? I mean, honestly, right? Because there was investigation and she talked, and obviously that's why we know about this now, and so on and so forth. But that is so wild.
It is.
So, okay, I don't know if you're going to go into this or not, but like as you're telling that story, like the one part of my brain that's obviously trying to disprove everything that you're telling me is like, maybe he faked a suicide, and for whatever reason.
Oh, okay, sure,
and
sure.
he just wanted to say thank you and goodbye on his way out, and he, I don't know, got a different body to fake the suicide. Like, just bear with me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that could perhaps explain it, right?
For sure. So that's very interesting.
However, then I kept thinking this through. Anyone going through the trouble to fake their own death wouldn't fake their death and then go say thank you and goodbye.
That's exactly
You would do that before. So even in that scenario where, like, I'm trying to logically explain this out, like, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
You would go say, hey, thank you so much. You've been such a wonderful influence in my life, and I've enjoyed my company, my time with you, and cool. Goodbye.
Totally.
Then you go fake the death, right? You don't do it in the other order, because that would blow the whole thing open.
We've done enough of these shows and talked about fake deaths enough to where we know how this actually has to work.
So that doesn't work.
I guess, so I hadn't even thought of that angle when I was reading this stuff. Maybe to take a step further, two possible logical explanations is maybe she misplaced the day.
Okay, that's true too.
It was such a quick turnaround from the time that she supposedly talked to him and then learning the news. You wouldn't say, oh, that was Thursday. Or I'm sorry, you wouldn't say that was last night, but in fact it was 2 nights ago.
Right.
It's not like 2 weeks ago what felt like 3. It was recent enough.
Man.
I guess the only other one I was thinking of too was similar to what you were saying, but maybe like he knew some people were after him or something. But like still, you wouldn't. It just like the order of events don't make any sense.
Dude, okay, so just as a side comment, I've been seeing my stylist for probably like 9 or 10 years now.
Nice.
And I love her, and she's great, and we have a good relationship, but she is not the person I would go to like after I died to say like peace out and thank you.
Dude, is she a listener? Shh.
No, she's not actually. Are you still doing the podcast? Like, yeah. Oh, fun.
So I like where your head's at, though, because for me, as I was reading that story, I could not, for the life of me, think of an actual possible, logical, rational explanation. I just couldn't. So I'm glad you brought that in. Maybe, but even that doesn't make sense. Just to continue the story just a bit further. So, and I recognize the fact that hindsight obviously is 20/20. She's obviously going to be somehow trying to reconcile something in her head. But she said she remembers from the conversation that when he first opened the door, she said she's like, well, I actually kind of felt an unsettling chill. Okay, sure. And she said she noticed his face seemed to be a little bit more grayish and pale than usual. And she said, she goes, I do also recall him saying, and I'm quoting here, I'm in a really good place. So, I mean, like, I don't know if...
Yeah.
Almost like the shock value of everything then causes her later to be like, okay, well, this and this and this and actually this. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I could very much see that going both ways.
Completely.
Like, that could have been true, or she could be adding things to the story afterwards to either comfort or try to make sense of this absolutely bizarre thing. I mean, first of all, like, someone you've known for a long time and who's confided very, personal secrets and parts of their life to you.
And even the mundane too, of course.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Find out that they ended their own life.
Yeah,
it's like that's gonna weigh heavy on anyone. And then you add in all this potential paranormal weirdness to the whole thing. It's like, what? Yeah, you could very easily start adding facts.
It kind of, it doesn't help. Like, it just doesn't help.
That is so. When did that take place?
2001.
Oh, okay.
So, fairly recent.
In my mind, that was like 3 years ago.
100%, dude. Now, Nina, what's interesting, too, was she was saying, she's like, and look, this is just what she's saying, right? Yeah. But I think there's something to it. This is where I'm going. She says, a lot of times when a person dies tragically, there's a certain amount of guilt or turmoil. I don't think they leave this earth. I think they stay here and wrap up some unfinished business. So maybe he's just needed to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually one of the common theories to all of this is basically, if we're going to follow this path that we discussed with like surviving death and consciousness and all of these things, maybe it is some sort of psychic psi phenomenon, right? Yeah. Perhaps.
Well, the traumatic and suddenness of these deaths, hence the crisis terminology, could in fact, if I'm hearing you correctly, could in fact imply that the soul, I guess, isn't quite ready to leave, isn't quite ready to go beyond, that they are stuck here and may, in fact, just bounce around and do a couple, wellness checks on some people, right?
That's right. That's exactly what they should be called. Wellness checks, paranormal wellness checks. The thing that you highlighted too, though, also is important, which is basically like there seems to be a window of time after which somebody passes, especially after a traumatic event, in which they're like still like conscious.
Yeah.
And this came up in the surviving death stuff we did.
Not conscious, but the consciousness
is still real. Or something. Yeah, right.
I don't know.
So I want to talk more on this particular theory, right? Which is basically it's this person in crisis telepathically transmitting somehow an image of themselves, or there's some sort of, what do you call it? Remote viewing,
sure,
beaming out this energy into the universe, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I know, I get it. All of that sounds like woo, but I mean, this gets back to something we talked about during the placebo episode.
Oh, sure.
And this is like a sad, disturbing example, but I think
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
but it actually lends some credibility to this idea because, well, and I'll explain what it is, but like there's not really an explanation for this. And this is basically the famous or infamous Soviet rabbit experiment.
Oh, yep.
So you had a mother rabbit on shore, presumably hundreds of miles away, and they had somehow wired, diodes and electrodes or whatever to this rabbit's brain, and the Soviets took the baby rabbits down into a sub at the depths of the ocean and systematically and at a very specific point in time killed off each one of the rabbits. Of course, what happened later, they went back and they checked, the brain activity of the mother rabbit on shore, hundreds of miles away, hundreds of meters and kilometers above the ocean floor. And at the exact time when each of the babies had been killed, they measured some level of brain wave activity happening in the mother rabbit.
Yeah.
And it just makes you go, what the heck?
Yeah. How are these connected? Why are they connected? Also, what kind of evil genius devised and carried through that plan? But that's for a different story. But it is so interesting. There, not to steal your thunder.
Sure.
There's a famous anecdote or story, I guess. So when, I don't know how old Elvis was.
Yeah.
The Elvis. He was in a car accident. I think this was before he was famous. And he was just very, very close to his mother. Like growing up, she was the one stable point in his life, so on and so forth. Anyway, he was in a car accident at let's say, 3:30 in the morning.
Sure.
And at that exact moment, his mother just woke up out of a sound sleep and just screamed his name. Like, Elvis, and she could just sense that something was wrong and something happened with him. And it's like, wait, what? That is so weird. How does that happen?
You hear about this also with twins.
Oh, yes.
It'll be like, oh, I'm living in Chicago. My brother lives in New York. I just got a buddy. This actually happened to a buddy of mine at work.
Oh.
He's like, I just got this really bad feeling. Called his brother, turned out, I just had a car accident or something. It seemed like that. And it's just like, but like just this sudden sense of dread.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, and look, I mean, the Soviet experiment's one example of like governments looking into this stuff because there seems to be something to it. I mean, the other one, to take it even a little bit step further, I mean, is really, it's almost like the Project Stargate stuff. And it's really the, from the late 1970s until the mid 1990s, the U.S. spent tens of millions of dollars on studying remote viewing, psi, Uri Geller stuff. Like, there's something there. We just can't really put our finger on it.
Just because modern science can't quantify it in a very specific and methodological method doesn't mean it's not a real thing.
That's right.
That's me talking, of course.
I think that's right, though. I think that's where it's almost like, just because it doesn't fit neatly within the parameters of like the scientific, method, doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, scientists would say it's not real, but it's. I think it'd also be hard to get more objective than checking a rabbit's brainwaves because that's not.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's super weird.
Let's keep going because I've given you some modern examples, but I found this other one really interesting, and this one's actually from some time ago. This goes back to the early 1900s. One of the OG crisis apparitions, if you will. And it's related to Royal Air Force pilot Colonel George Henderson. This one's actually pretty famous. So back in March of 1928, Captain Raymond Hinchcliffe, chief pilot for the Imperial Airways, wanted to be one of the first to make a transatlantic nonstop flight. Initially, the plan for him was to go with another seasoned American pilot by the name of Charles Levine. But I guess for a number of different reasons, technical and otherwise, they weren't actually able to do the flight. Like, they didn't even attempt it because it just didn't line up. It didn't work.
Sure.
Enter a woman named Elsie McKay. Elsie McKay was a rich heiress, pilot, and actress, and she offered Captain Hinchcliffe reward money and a life insurance policy for his family if he would co-pilot the flight across the Atlantic with her. So she wanted to be the first woman to actually go across the Atlantic and
totally
cash in on the press there.
Right.
But I mean, I think you can see probably where this is going. But anyways, let's keep going. And I will say, too, I don't know exactly how McKay and Hinchcliffe connected, but I guess they somehow knew each other in their friend circles or whatever. Fast forward to the morning of March 14th, 1928, off the coast of West Africa. Below deck in an ocean liner was another gentleman. He was an RAF, Royal Air Force pilot, Colonel George Henderson, the person I named at the very beginning. Henderson and Hinchcliffe, from what I understood, knew each other from their previous experience in the military. And while Colonel George Henderson was in his room under the deck off the coast of Africa, said that Captain Hinchcliffe appeared in his cabin, as real can be. And according to Colonel Henderson, a man with less than -0 incentive to lie said, and I'm quoting here, his friend Hinch appeared saying, "Hendy, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've got this woman with me, and I'm lost."
No.
Henderson, 3 days later, boat docked, found out, of course, that McKay, Hinchcliffe were both missing.
Oh, my God. That is... So sorry if you said this. Did he know? Did the gentleman on the boat who saw the apparition, did he know that the other one was doing the flight?
I don't know, but that's a very good question.
I mean...
That's a very good question.
It doesn't necessarily explain it, but if he didn't know, that would just be...
that would be all the more.
The wall bonkers.
Yeah. Actually, this story is funny because there's not a lot of source material on it. I found like one old article. It was crazy. but that would be the tell right there.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose you could say also, on the other hand, I mean, the guy's clearly a pilot, so you would just assume throughout all days or whatever he's probably flying. But still, like, this is one that you just cannot actually explain.
That is so weird. It's just giving off. Yeah, like he's lost.
Remote viewing, I don't know.
Running out of gas.
It's like reverse remote viewing.
Yeah.
It's like it's paranormal hologram remote viewing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just like showed up in a ship.
Yeah.
In a room in a ship.
Yeah.
It's like,
and I wanted some more details around like whether he just like vanished or like he turned around and he was I didn't see anything
walked
like that.
In,
but like
walked out.
Yeah, it makes you wonder too what else he experienced. But it's just so crazy. And also, as we've said on the show before, oftentimes with military, government workers, there's just no interest in like sounding crazy.
You don't say things.
You don't share these stories typically.
That is so wild. I mean, what does this even imply?
So if you're going to go down the path of saying, hey, look, this probably is some sort of reverse remote viewing situation.
Yeah.
Or true sight, right?
Yeah.
ESP or something. I mean, that's what it has to be.
So part of me, like, the implication is perhaps an afterlife, or at least some form of consciousness after death, at least for a brief period of time.
Yeah, right.
But like something like this is just like a different way of communication, because like if you believe this, and if that apparition existed while that person the pilot was still alive, that's not an afterlife.
No, that's like telepathy.
It is different. Yeah, it's a telepathy, and it's not like I saw him in his airplane in my cargo hold. You know, it's like he was there talking to me, panicked, like, what am I going to do? I got this woman and I'm lost.
Dude, that's exactly. I'm glad you broke this down the way you did, because it's like, okay, if these happen while the person is alive still, then it's basically telepathy. I have to assume
it's some sort of telepathic communication.
And if it's after death, then it suggests surviving consciousness, or that thought packet energy continues to go.
And I mean, yes, it's all under the umbrella of a crisis situation, but nevertheless, it is two very distinct just happenings.
Yeah.
It's just so weird.
Let's keep going. Let's take another angle to all this. So, okay, we've talked about the psi telepathy situation, right? I mean, let's talk now about, like, straight up, perhaps more of the ghost or apparition situation here. Okay. So, two folks you need to know in this next story: Josh Harris and his grandpa Raymond Harris.
Cool.
Josh was the grandson, Raymond, of course, the grandpa, and evidently they were like best buds, did everything together.
Cool.
When Josh was real young, spent countless hours fishing, yard work, playing together, you name it.
What year? What general?
Yep. In 1997, when Josh was about 12 years old, his grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer and only, sadly, given a few weeks to live.
Oof.
Well, a few weeks after his grandpa's diagnosis, Josh was home, sleeping on the couch, when he woke up with a startle at 2 a.m. His grandfather was there, standing over him. Harris said, "At first, it took me by surprise. I wondered why he was standing in the hallway and not in his house with everyone else." His grandfather spoke. Harris said, "He just looked at me. He smiled and he said, 'Everything will be okay.'" His grandfather then turned around and started walking toward the kitchen. Harris rose up to follow, but then spun around actually when the phone rang. His aunt, who was in the other room, answered. Harris said, "Well, first of all, when I turned around to look, he was gone," he being Grandpa. And then he heard in the other room crying, "Josh, your grandpa is gone." Josh said, no, he was just here.
I just talked to him.
And he said he kept arguing with his aunt, like, no, he was literally just here. He's not gone. I just spoke to him.
Yeah.
And it turns out he had passed. His grandpa had passed that.
I believe that. Like, I don't know why. I love to poke holes in all these crazy stories you bring at me every week. But like, I believe that so much. I just do. It seems so natural and understandable and everything. I would almost be more surprised if it didn't happen. How's that?
You hear about these stories not just from when I like share them on the show, but also from other people every once in a while, like something kind of like this, and you're just like, what is it? And
it seems like almost any party you're in, someone has an anecdote about this.
You're right.
You know, right. No one wants to talk about it necessarily because it makes them seem just a little bit unstable, but it seems common enough. It truly does.
I think that's why Dr. Jim Tucker wants to study some of this stuff too, because it does seem to fit sometimes within certain scenarios, certain parameters, and it actually kind of like makes sense. But this one would be one, I guess, if you're going to say, okay, what would be an explanation for it? I can't think of one. I mean, this sounds like just a straight up ghost apparition.
Yeah.
Like, I'm passing on. See you later.
So, I mean, I guess to play this out in the other way, it's like maybe he made it up in his head. But the timing of it, of course, the timing of it is what makes it even more fascinating.
Yeah, well, right. So basically, yeah, I guess you could say technically a dream, right?
Yep.
Woke up at 2 a.m. or whatever.
Of course, yeah.
But the fact that a few moments later, of course, gets the call.
The apparition was interrupted by a phone call telling him that the person had died.
Well said.
Like that, you can't make it time any better than that.
Exactly. So yeah, if it were weeks apart or something like that, totally different story. But that to me was just like, oof.
That is so much.
I got another one for you here. Another one, last one here. And I don't like ones that involve kids.
No, I don't either. So
for many reasons.
Skip this.
Yeah, okay. Hey, we'll wrap it up here, folks. For many reasons, oftentimes, of course, it implies kids, suffering or dying. But then also, like, in addition to that, the kids that experience these types of things, I just have to believe they're not making it up.
No, I really don't think so either.
And I don't believe in, like, just the, fanciful, wild imagination scenario.
Kids have a great they'll tell stories all day long.
Yeah.
No. Not
right, exactly.
Not like this.
Especially now that I have kids, like I know, like there's this imaginative side to kids, but that doesn't come out when it comes to this kind of stuff. So let me tell you what happened. So you have a woman by the name of Donna Stewart, and at the time that this story took place, she was 6 years old and in a small town in Oregon. One of her best friends was a boy named Danny. Mm-hmm. And Danny had to go to the hospital for a routine tonsil procedure, get his tonsils removed. And so the morning before he went to the hospital, actually, he went over and played with Donna, and they had a great time, and they were playing together and stuff. And then,
wait, did you say how old they are?
6.
Okay, cool.
6 years old.
Got it. Yep.
And so while they're playing together, everyone's happy, and then Danny goes to leave to have his tonsils removed, and that's basically that. And okay, the next day, Donna, she recalls playing in her bedroom when she looked up and she saw Danny standing there. And he asked her, of course, if she wanted to go out and play. Cool.
Yeah.
Donna walked, down the hall to her mother's bedroom and said, hey, Mom, Danny's here. He invited me to go out and play. And that's when her mother, Donna recalls her mother, completely freezing. Like, in place.
Yeah.
Went totally white. Donna's mom said, and I'm quoting here, she told me that wasn't possible. And that's when her mom told her that due to an allergic reaction during surgery, Danny had died a full day before.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
And then when Donna went back to her bedroom, of course,
he wasn't there.
Correct.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, kids have fanciful imaginations. I am not going to, gloss over that. However, kids don't think that their friends magically apparate in their rooms and try to convince their parents otherwise. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's
at least in my experience.
Right. It's not like Donna was thinking beforehand, like, oh, I hope everything's okay. Like, she was just playing by herself, and then, oh, okay, cool, Danny's here. Let's go play.
Of course, yeah, totally. Makes perfect sense. Right?
No reason to even think otherwise.
Oh, wow.
And so this is almost as objective to me as, like, the rabbit scenario, where it's like, this is, like, straight up proof.
Man, oh, man. Well, that's heavy.
That's heavy.
That's a good one to end it on. Thank you. No, but I mean, it's incredibly fascinating. What's interesting about this one, as compared to the other ones you mentioned, is the time difference. So this is a scenario where the death occurred like what, a full day?
Yeah, minimally we can say 12 hours, right? Like minimally.
Sure. So nearly, correct me if I'm wrong, nearly every other crisis apparition that you mentioned has to do like almost instantaneous. I guess maybe the first one you mentioned.
True.
the gentleman
there was
in
the
the
delay.
car
Right.
that was murdered. But so that's fascinating. That is a fascinating scenario.
It is. So I guess like, and kind of the way I laid this whole episode out of like, first of all, the first couple were more like in the moment, and the last ones seemed to be a little bit more like, okay, maybe ghost apparitions.
Yeah.
Guardian angels is also another like theory that I read about, like as a possible explanation here.
I would love a whole one just on that.
Well, that's actually, I'm saving that for another show,
good.
believe it or not.
Good. Okay.
Because, as much as you try to put brackets around this stuff, it's like, look, there's no clean break point. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's all related, maybe it's all different, and we're just seeing different angles to this stuff. But it's like, okay, I guess logically, all of this can be explained by coincidence, maybe sort of, and or imaginations and or people lying. If it's not any of that, then maybe it's some sort of weird telepathy, psi explanation. And I guess if it's not that, then maybe it's like the soul surviving death and or like angels or demons or ghosts or all of the above.
All the above?
And literally everything I just said all mixed together.
All at the same exact time. I don't know. Okay, so I think I know the answer to this, but you believe this? Yes.
I guess I have to. I feel like I have to at this point.
Yeah, and I'm kind of right there with you. It's like there's more than enough circumstantial evidence that it just goes one step further, and it's like I think we need to actually start paying attention to this.
That's right.
And the logical, analytical, science-minded part of my brain has a hard time, just like modern science has a hard time with this. It's like, how do you quantify this? How do you categorize this? How do you just gather the data? How do you, it's all so different, and you can't take a picture. You can't, there's no hard science.
That's right.
So it's so hard to, I guess, believe it.
It's hard to study it and then have proof of any of it to then therefore believe it.
Yeah. So what's the name of the guy that's asking for people to
Dr. Jim Tucker.
And where's
UV Medical School, University of Virginia. So he's done all the parapsychology stuff. And I did a bunch of the before life memories, reincarnation stories. Like he's somebody who's actually trying to put science behind
from a science perspective, which is just so fascinating that he's able to get funding for this. But thank God, because it's like this is, if you can crack this, like you pretty much break it wide open, right?
That's a very fair point. Everybody should be studying this stuff because these are some of the biggest questions. But regardless, if you can't come down with a rational conclusion, I wanted to end this with a quote from a professor of logic at Oxford University.
Okay.
H.H. Price. And this is what he said, and I just love it because I feel like it summarizes maybe how you and I both come down on this stuff. And he says, first of all, I will say he comes to the conclusion that after death of the physical body, there's still some sort of other body which allows one to continue to have this sense of I. And so he thought there could be a non-material body like one has in dreams. It could be compared to a dream state when we see things, places, and people, also communicate with them and consider them all real till we wake up and compare the dream world with the real world on waking up. And he claimed that perhaps life after death would only mean a change of consciousness and not a change of place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that, isn't it? It's like, I don't know, whatever we all do when we sleep and dream and have these real apparitions in our head and we interact with them, maybe that's kind of also related to all this. And by the way, maybe there's another sense of I, and it's our spirit and our soul, and it lives after death.
Yada.
Right?
Easy. That idea of the dream world being the same for everyone. And we all like someone was like, hey, that'd be great if you could do that as a topic. And I'm like, yeah, it would be great if I could do that as a topic. Like, how do you even like broach that?
That's right. I
would love to, but it's like, I don't know, send me the Wikipedia article and I'll work from there. Like, what?
Yeah.
But it's all just endlessly fascinating.
Completely agree with you.
So I don't know. What's the final verdict?
I gotta say, I'm going to lean towards the telepathy situation.
Kinda.
Yeah.
I'm kind of there with you. Except when it happens after they die, and then
right.
I don't know.
Maybe there's energy that goes out in the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you come down?
Yes.
Fair enough.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. As Zach mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have tons of other episodes about this and everything else over on our Patreon feed. So check that out if you have a chance. Patreon.com/Crackpot Podcast. You can sign up there and get hundreds of other episodes.
Exactly.
Check them out. Keep you busy. So rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local apparitions about our podcasts, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.